Hey, it's Saturday night. Welcome to conference. We're glad that you're here. The second night of our Believe online conference. A little bit of a different format tonight if you joined in last night. And by the way, the sessions will all be available online afterwards. Last night, we heard from a great speaker. Tonight, I am actually interviewing Pastor Mark Clark from the Village Church in the Greater Vancouver area. He is part of leading one of the largest and fastest growing churches in Canada. He was an atheist turned believer and follower in Christ, turned pastor. He's got an incredible story. Published author. You can find his book at Indigo Chapters, The Problem of God, answering some of these difficult questions we have about faith and belief. I'm excited to interview him tonight. It's a great thing to be part of. Glad that you've tuned in for the second night. One more night, tomorrow night, Sunday night, 7 p.m., same time. And if you're not part of a church regularly, join us tomorrow morning for service. Parkway Church's service is available at 9 a.m. on our website, Facebook, and YouTube. Join in for that if you don't have a church that you're part of. Our church during the COVID season is meeting entirely online, save for one public gathering once a month through the fall season. We met in October, November. We're meeting December 13th again for an in-person church service at the Ambassador Hotel Grand Ballroom. If you're not part of a church, we would love if you would join us. You can check us out online. You have to register for that service. We are complying with all the government mandated COVID safety guidelines, practicing social distancing, practicing contact tracing, all of those things. It is an enormous room where we're meeting for church. Lots of space to social distance. We would love you to be there for our in-person Christmas gathering. Check us out online. You need to register there, myparkwaychurch.ca. Click on news and events, register for service. Grab pen and paper, grab your tablet, whatever, take some notes. Great conversation I'm having tonight with Pastor Mark Clark. Join in with us. Also, just another reminder, as I said, conference entirely free. There was some cost to it. We are glad to give it to you. But if you are interested in partnering with a project that we are part of as a church, Project Solid Start, helping early education happening in the country of Bosnia. Really special thing that World Hope Canada is doing there. We're coming alongside and helping them. We've already put forward $2,000 towards our $4,000 goal. If you'd like to partner with us that way, myparkwaychurch.ca, click on giving, click on World Hope, and it'll take you some links there to be part of it. Enjoy Saturday. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm just going to put her out there. We'll start her off. I'm talking to Mark Clark tonight. He is the senior pastor of the Village Church in Vancouver, Canada. It is a multi-campus, multi-site church. I was thinking there was an old band years ago called Stabbing Westward. It sounds like you were stabbing eastward as far as campus. You have a campus in Calgary now. Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, we're right now we have someone lined up for the Toronto GTA area and Winnipeg. So we'll see where this thing goes.
Awesome. That's incredible. So 10 years in, this is one of the largest churches in Canada, one of the fastest growing churches in Canada. And I'm delighted to have you here, Mark. Thank you so much for taking time to do this. Our conference, COVID happened. We are a church plant who is a little over a year old now. And man, 6 months of that have been spent during COVID. And we did a little creative thing, to just do this online conference over the summer. It was a hit. We had people connect to our church through that. And we wanted to just sort of open this up. And the conference, if you tuned in Friday night at home, you heard a great speaker. There's another one Sunday night. Saturday night, we're talking to Mark. He has a great story. He's a pastor of this incredible, vibrant church in the Greater Vancouver area, stabbing eastward, and he has an incredible story. So, Mark, I know a little bit about it. You grew up in an atheist home. You grew up as an atheist, and are now leading this church. Tell me a little bit how do you go from being an atheist and being from a family like that to being a pastor in Vancouver? Tell us a little bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Dustin. Appreciate it. It's kind of a crazy story. You know, my dad was definitely like a more aggressive atheist to the point where, as I share in kind of the opening chapter of a book I wrote a couple years ago, he named my brother Matthew. The Problem of God. Yeah, that's. I didn't want to do like a cheap plug, Well,
I was gonna do one for you anyway. So yeah, it's good.
So yes, in the intro to that book, I talk about it. So he named my brother Matthew And my brother's 4 years older than me. And then told my mom that they had to spell it with one T because he didn't want to be biblical. And then 4 years later, they had me and called me Mark. So the irony of that would have been lost on him because he's never picked up a Bible. No church, no Bible, no prayer, nothing. And I'd gone to summer camp. Once my parents got divorced when I was about 9, my parents shipped me off to summer camp. I heard the gospel. It kind of seeded this great little foundation. And when I was 17, 18, living in high school, did the whole thing, Dustin, drugs and nonsense and kind of the stuff you do when Jesus, isn't part of your life when you're a high school kid. And 17 years old, a guy named Chris introduced me to Jesus in woodworking class, and I started exploring. I'm a rational thinker, always kind of been a skeptic and a rational kind of, if I'm going to believe something, it can't be based on feelings alone. It has to be based on reason, the intellectual endeavor. And so he presented me with Christianity. I went and explored it. And over the course of years, gave my life to Jesus, explored Christianity from a philosophical, psychological, historical perspective, met God studying the Bible as a 17-year-old kid, chain smoking outside of my high school and just reading the Bible. And Jesus met me there. And then I started to tell people about Jesus. And when I was 19, I first stepped into a church and they were like, hey, and I started to kind of just meet people and be like, what is this about? Met a girl. That's the reason I stayed there. And then my youth pastor was like, dude, I just see something in you and you should preach. And I was like, okay. So I kind of, put my cigarette out and walked up and preached and I don't know, something just went down. And so anyway, kind of the rest is history. I went to Bible college and felt called to get into a scholarship and then moved out to BC on my way to a PhD. And then God changed all that around and said, no, I want you to plant a church in Vancouver. So that's what we did 10 years ago. So it was a church that we started with a heart to reach skeptics, people like me. And that's what started to happen. And so, yeah, the church is kind of, people started to meet Jesus and get their life changed and bring their friends. And that's kind of, 10 years later, here we are. So.
It's awesome. That's incredible. I meant to say this at the first, but I first saw you preach, Mark, at the Change Conference in Toronto. It was a youth convention. I was a youth pastor for 17 years. You preached there, and I appreciated so much your message that night. And I put you on a spot a little bit. You told all those kids in Toronto, so I hope it's okay to tell you, to bring this up now. But it was really funny. You the way that you expressed a little bit. I know that I watched an interview earlier today with you that you have a condition called Tourette syndrome. Is this is true? Yes.
Yeah.
Or have. I'm not using the terminology right. But I love the moment you shared that in front of a bunch of teenagers. I just saw all these open doors happen, and then you paused and you said, "I know what you're thinking now. When's this guy going to start swearing?" That's what you said. Yeah, it was hilarious. The kids lost it. I was youth pastor for 17 years. Our kids were incredibly engaged in what you shared after that. I appreciate the candor with you, the way that you share, how honestly and genuinely you share. Through that, and you had everybody tuned in after that. Some hard kids out of my youth group were tuned in. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I have found that when I was 9 or 10, I got that. I don't know if it was from my parents divorcing, some psychological trauma, and and I used to literally have one of my tics was swearing. And so, it's like the one job you're not going to get when you randomly throw F-bombs around is a preacher.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to work. And yet God has kind of used it, like you said, to open doors. I planted a church in a pretty, what people would, call like a perfect little part of Canada. Everyone's, got money and nice cars and nice houses and perfect marriages. And, one of my challenges was, how am I going to reach perfect people? Given the fact that I have this weird, like I'm twitching my face around, and, at that time we're 16 people, Dustin. So,
yeah.
In my brain, it ain't going to work. And I remember my mentor saying to me, like, I think it will work because you'll give them permission to be broken and need transformation in their life. And that's precisely what happened. All these seemingly perfect people showed up and went, oh, okay, I'm kind of like him. He's imperfect. And, so anyway, so that's kind of what the story has been of Village from the beginning.
That's incredible. Wow. And I appreciated, that whole story. I watched the interview earlier today, and you talk, you mentioned that in Corinthians, mentioned that, God using the foolish things of the world, he takes us the way we are when we say yes, and uses us for incredible things. It's 100%. It's awesome. Yeah, very cool. So you shared a little bit about coming to Christ, your journey, from being that teenager to where you are now. Tell me a little bit, like, you mentioned having a skeptical mind. This conference that we're doing online, it is for skeptics. What were some of the things in your teenage, young adult kind of heart there that were immediate reservations about Jesus or the gospel or even the existence of God? Like, what were some of there's likely some common questions and common, I'm not into that. There's some common just sort of no's immediately. What were some of the things that you were just wrestling with? And they're likely pretty common to a lot of people who are listening tonight. Yeah.
Well, some of them were like the existence of God, the legitimacy of the Bible, the problem of hell, the problem of evil and suffering. Those ones are probably pretty high up the list of stuff that I was just like, look, if I'm going to give up stuff, which tends to be how a high school kid thinks about Christianity, which is really dumb and shallow. If I'm going to basically give up my human autonomy and my sexuality and whatever I actually feel like doing in this moment for this like bigger, broader thing, how do I know it's actually real and true? And so those were the kind of the big ones. Does God really exist? What's the scientific or the philosophical data, that he does? Hell, evil, and suffering. Is the Bible legit? Those were pretty, far up the list of like, if I'm going to get, because my personality is like, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, full bore. So it's like, you got to show me whether this is legitimate. And then through exploring, I realized, Christianity has like, in the marketplace of ideas, the best answers to these foundational questions.
Yeah. 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 So listen, you were in this skeptical mind frame, coming to Christ, the journey of all of those things. This is obviously God has geared you for this calling. How I'm asking you, if you were speaking to a skeptic tonight who's listening, I've read articles on this recently. I don't know, a few years ago, Maclean's put an article out. It might be a little while longer now, that was talking about, a lot of Canadians that they would not identify as being atheist per se. They're sort of the nuns and duns. When they use that word, that they're, one article I read said 70%, right, of Canada, 50 to 70, somewhere there, represent people who they're not particularly anti-Jesus. They just don't really care or are engaged in any kind of organized church or things like that. It's not part of their life. It's not what they're looking for. How do you open up a conversation? How do you what would you say to somebody like that who is a nun and done tonight, who's sort of like, it's just not in my frame of reference right now. I don't care. I don't like. What would you say to them? Yeah.
Well, I mean, in some sense, you should care, but I mean, saying that's not going to really do much. So it's kind of the question of, this idea that we could like Jesus, or, I don't mind Jesus, but I don't like, organized religion and that kind of stuff. It's, you've really got to, my biggest encouragement would actually to be, don't assume who Jesus was. Actually open up the Gospels and read who he was, because what I found was he was different than I thought he was. He was more interesting and intriguing than I thought he was, and he was more scandalous than I thought he was. And so this idea, I just finished a manuscript and sent it off for the follow-up to the book you talked about, Problem of God, called The Problem of Jesus, and it comes out in February. And the idea of it is Jesus wasn't actually a great he's a great leader. Jesus is my homeboy t-shirt.
Yeah.
He's a great example of love and that kind of stuff. The Deepak Chopra, New Age philosophy, weak kind of Tony Robbins meets Chuck Norris kind of great example of a good life kind of guy. That actually, when you read the Gospels, that's not what you get. What you get are two responses to Jesus. The one response is, I want to follow him. I want to worship him. I want my whole life to be dedicated to him. And the other response is, I want to throw him off a cliff and he must die. And that's kind of it. There's no like middle of the road Canadian nicety version of like, well, I don't want to follow him, but I don't want to kill him, so I'll just like him. That's not a thing when it comes to Jesus. So that's the first issue, is like, don't take the media's version of Jesus or the Jesus you learned in some context. Deal with the real. Augustine said the Bible is the face of God for us now. And I would challenge anybody, get your confrontation from the text itself versus what people are saying about the text. So read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Read them again and go, is this guy someone I would follow and build my life on? Because what you're going to find there is someone who doesn't give much wiggle room around the question of God, salvation, ourselves, and our destiny. So I don't care. I know that's kind of how we feel, but it's not a great response, because Jesus, what we do with Jesus literally defines the fate of every person who ever existed. And that's not an overstatement. That defines the next billion years of your life. If Jesus is right, if Jesus is true, then everything about what you do with him defines your pleasure and your delight. And I think this is an important point. I think our culture is defined. The reason, Dustin, you and I make decisions every day of our life is our own happiness. Our own pleasure is the number one motivating factor for everything we do. Well, Jesus, what we forget, what we pitch Christianity as is believe in Jesus and then, carry your cross and he'll make you do a bunch of stuff you don't want to do. And, it's like, sweet, it sounds awesome. But at least I won't go to hell. That's kind of like the pitch. And that ain't the pitch when you read the Gospels. It's like, let me tell you how to find joy, true happiness, true pleasure, true delight, true contentment, forevermore. It's me and only me. And if you do any life in any different way than I tell you, it's going to shrivel your soul. And in the long game, your joy is going to be less. And your delight and pleasure is going to be less, and it's going to be for less time. And so Jesus kind of has this whole reframing of joy, delight, peace, the things we seek at the deepest parts of our soul. He kind of satisfies in a different way than the world does. And I think that's, in the end, kind of the war that we're in the midst of, is who we going to choose to kind of satisfy us ultimately. So that's what I found when I started studying Jesus. I was like, oh, I can't really stay in this kind of known middle ground, like not make a decision. I got to go one way or the other. Mm-hmm. I kind of tell my church that, like, Easter Sunday, the image I give them is like, it's the biggest Sunday of the year. And I look out at all these people, thousands of people show up that never come to our church, Christmas Eve and Easter. And instead of kind of trying to like entertain them and be like, we're so glad you came. That's cool too. But it's kind of like, what are you doing here is what I say to them. Because either the story I just told you, Christmas Eve, Easter, whatever, is the dumbest, craziest nonsense that's ever been perpetrated upon the human race, ever. Yeah. Or it's true, and you got to give your life to it. So your choices are not to show up, put on your nice slacks, and go over to grandma's house and eat turkey tonight and pretend everything I said was fine. It's you should be picketing our church because I'm spreading lies and I'm deceiving your grandma, or you should give your life to Jesus. That's it. Those are the two choices. Your move, Chief. And then I drop the mic and walk off.
Mic drop right there.
Yeah. Those are your options in the end. And that's what I see in the person of Jesus. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you are kind of suggesting that in Canada, the Jesus that a lot of us have had hints about or maybe known sort of a little about isn't probably the one that is in Scripture.
yeah, I would say
Yeah.
there's probably glimpses.
Yeah.
There's probably glimpses, but he's not. He's not what we as a culture
Yeah.
tend to craft him into. And
Yeah.
why that's really important is because if he was, then we're making him in our image. And so we tend to make a Jesus that's, great to 2020 Canadians,
Yeah.
Enlightenment. And then you go to, a different culture and they make him in their image.
Yeah.
Or you take a different movement and they make Jesus in their image. And what you begin to realize is that wasn't actually who Jesus was. He was a specific person at a specific time with a specific message, which had very focused implications for his world and our world.
Yeah.
And that's who you've got to actually have a confrontation with.
Yeah. That's a great word. And if you're listening tonight, I want to challenge you that we actually have, this is the shameless plug. We're giving away a bunch of these this weekend, so we'll send them out to you. If you've registered for a conference online, we'll send them to you. We'll drop them off if you're in the Greater Kingston area. We want to pass that on to you. But study the Gospels. That's great. It's a great place to start. To move through and come to your own conclusions that way. We want to help you along that journey too. If you're tuning into conference, check in with our church. We want to help you along that process. There's some great places you can connect these next few weeks to talk that way. I have a couple more little thoughts here, questions. I would love to hear your feedback on. I appreciate you sharing on that. Believe that's the name of our conference. We're speaking to people that might have questions about faith, about Jesus. Talk to me a little bit. What is the most common? You mentioned planting a church, geared towards skeptics. What is the most common complaint you get from somebody who does not believe in Jesus Christ or God, or what is the most common complaint that you get from somebody that's like, this is I don't want this, I don't, what's the main thing? Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a few things, right? There's things that people voice, and then there's the thing behind the thing.
Yeah.
So the things that people voice are usually like they take a progressive idea, like a post-enlightenment idea, and they say, well, we believe this, and the Bible, which most of them haven't read, or Jesus, which they haven't read, the Gospels, says this about this issue, and that's not right. And so they're less evidential questions, and more moralistic, and so, which is interesting. That's a whole interesting conversation in of itself, because of course you have a generation that thought God's not real and the Bible's not real because of all these evidential reasons. So science or archaeology or philosophy. Well, so much of that over the last 200 years has shown itself to be legitimate. Like, the more we study science, cosmology, DNA, the more reasons for the existence of God keep rising. The more we study history, literature, the more legitimacy for Jesus and the Gospels and the resurrection keep rising. And so what's happened is we've gone, okay, science isn't the problem anymore. Now the problem is social or moralistic. And so the Western world has decided that these things are right, and the Bible looks antiquated and ancient and old and out of touch with these issues, ergo we should write it off. So let's forget facts. Now we're talking about values. And that's what has now elevated, the Western mind to think they're smarter than everybody and better than. But my pushback to that would be, first off, be very careful that you are not the product of your cultural moment, so much so that you start to question a potential truth or narrative that is rooted in what God has done, that transcends time and cultures, because you're basically reading the cultural teleprompter. And the example would be this. If you, and I take this from a writer that I was reading a while ago, where he pointed out, he said this: if you think about the question of sexuality, for instance, obviously, Dustin, we know that the reason behind the reason that a lot of Westerners don't actually embrace Christianity is because, man, it means I can't sleep around and do whatever I want and get on Tinder and swipe right or whatever. I don't even know. But okay, so I'm not allowed to do that. Okay, so take sexuality. To a Westerner, to the regular Joe in the coffee shop in Canada, the idea is going to be this: I like Jesus and his views on violence, for instance, right? Let me sip my latte with my university degree. I went to U of T or Queens or whatever.
Sure.
And I say to myself, boy, I like Jesus' view on violence. I don't like America, and I don't like empire, and I don't like might and military might. So Jesus said, love your neighbor and pray for those who love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. You know, Jesus, he was such a great philosopher. Secondly, though, his views on sexuality are a little conservative. I don't like those, but I like his views on violence. Great. Now we jump in a plane and we travel to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we go to Saudi Arabia and we go to a coffee shop in Saudi Arabia and say, hey, what do you think about Jesus? Here's what they'll say. Man, you know what? His views on sexuality were a little liberal. I don't know about this, kind of idea. You know, we gotta clamp down on the marriage and the sexuality a little bit. He was a little loosey-goosey, the Bible is. You know, Paul, all about like, make sure you're having lots of sex in marriage, blah, blah. But this whole love your enemy thing, I'm not down with that. That is not cool. My enemies killed my grandparents, and they killed my grandparents' and we're going to get back at people because that's what you do here. So now your culture and your moment have started to define what you're going to take and what you're going to leave from the Bible. And I would just say, let's be humble enough to be careful to not be a product of our cultural moment versus taking what God might be trying to say through the Bible, through the person and the work of Jesus to challenge us in every culture and every moment that we live in.
That's a great challenge. Yeah, for all of us. Last brief questions, hopefully. Christians, I found Jesus, when I was young. I grew up within the church. I grew up at a great church, King's Church in St. John, New Brunswick, and the great, meaningful ministry came out of that. Christians get it wrong sometimes when we're engaging with skeptics or engaging with people and sharing our faith or sharing belief or any of those things. What are we doing terribly wrong sometimes when we are, right? Like we really are sometimes, we're trying to answer questions nobody's asking, what are we doing wrong?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. We're trying to answer questions nobody asks. We become a bit of an echo chamber as we get more and more into the nuances and the things that we care about, and we forget that none of your neighbors care about this question. Literally half the stuff we talk about in small groups, nobody in the world cares. But so that's part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say, one of the things would be we've probably become a little more sentimental and emotionally driven than would probably be helpful for a skeptic. So that's not to say we should, suck all the emotion out of Christianity. I think, I'm an emotional guy. I'm a passionate guy. I believe in, the charismatic expression of the church in the sense that the Holy Spirit gives joy, gives experiences. And those are amazing. And people, I was talking to one of our youth pastors the other day, and I said, my prayer I got a 14-year-old, 11-year-old, 9-year-old now, and we were talking about our kids, and I said, more than moralism, more than legalism, more than doing the right thing. My prayer right now for my kids and the youth of this generation is that they would have an encounter with the living God, because it's very hard to deny when you have that encounter. So I am very much for that. On the other hand, I think we've over sentimentalized and over emotionalized Christianity, whether that's reflected in our music or the way that we talk or our emphasis when we preach and teach and do doctrinal thinking or thinking around topics. We really appeal to the kind of, I don't want to say uneducated, but the more sentimentalized personality in culture. And, Mark Knoll, as you probably know, wrote a book years ago called The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind or the Christian Mind. And the opening line of that book is, the scandal of the Christian mind is there's not much of a Christian mind. And he went on to explain, like, we've become the anti-intellectuals of a culture. We've become we're going to hold on to this. Like you go back 500 years, if there's a group of people, and most Christians weren't anti-science. In fact, I talk about that in The Problem of God. There's a whole chapter on science, and it shows that through history, the church has never been anti-science. Now, there's been sects within Christianity, of course, that are anti-science, but if there's a group of people saying, we believe the earth is flat, and we're going to take some random passage from Isaiah and go, look, it says the four corners of the earth. It's like, well, no one thinks that's how you interpret the Bible, So I think there's a lot of examples potentially of Christians who are still holding on to potentially bad interpretations of the Bible, or just ideas that the Bible's not really asking them to hold on to. But it's been a pretty, over sentimentalized, over emotionalized version of Christianity that we're pitching to the world. And my fear with it is simply, if your whole life is built on coming to that church service and getting rallied up by the music, and your preacher is stomping around and getting you all jacked up, and you're dependent on his rhymes and his sermons that all start with the same letter. The problem with that is that when you come into a devastating tragedy in your life,
you're not,
what is the steel in your spine that's going to wake you up in the morning? It's got to be the text itself, and the God behind the text. So
you're not equipped. You're not. I appreciate that. That's a great response and a great challenge to us too. Last two. Yes. You good? Yes. Last two for real. You can answer in brief even too. COVID has.
That's not a thing, Dustin.
Okay. Yeah. I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you sharing like you have been. Last two questions. COVID has done things. It's wow. Yeah. So we're in Ontario. I'm from the Maritimes originally. I'm in Ontario now. We call this the center of the universe. Just whatever. Yeah. All of our news, it's geared towards here. I know things are different province to province, right? We're heading towards what looks like, more cases now today than, back when it first started. Things are flaring up. Things are threatening to shut back down again. This has rattled the church in all sorts of crazy ways across our country. Maybe across the world. We're really focused in on our own country, province, city right now. All of us are.
Sure.
But it's changed things like crazy. Any thoughts to just give? I have pastors from our denomination, we have people tuning in that they've asked me some questions to ask tonight too and pass on to you. But thoughts for what is God? I'm not asking you to be a prophet, but what's God saying in the middle of COVID right now? People are scrambling. People are, we're not sure. It's caused all sorts of crazy things as far as churches having to get used to these realities now, right? In ways that maybe a lot of churches in Canada haven't. I know your church has been online for, since its beginning, but a lot of churches haven't been. It's thrown them online. It's thrown them out of their usual thing. What's God teaching us through this? What do we need to, when people are talking about we need to get this done and go back to normal? I don't know if some of it's going to go back to normal. What's happening? Give me just even a couple minutes. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, totally. No, I appreciate the question. Obviously, it's so multifaceted. I think there's I think there's some negatives for sure. I mean, I think we're built for community as human
Yeah.
beings. It's not good for man to be alone, kind of Genesis 1 and 2. And so I think it's derived us, it deprived us of that. And I think people are pining for that again. I think, on the positive, it's causing the church to ask the question of what, I shared this in my church on Sunday, so all the, since we started 10 years ago, it's been getting up and saying, are you part of a production team? Are you part of are you a whatever, kids teacher, whatever? And all of these roles have disappeared. And now what you're left with is the question of what does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be church? What does it mean to not have people come to Christ at 9 and 11 on a Sunday, but on a Wednesday afternoon in my living room? What does it mean for the apostolic gene within the church to come alive? And I'm talking about not the professionals, not guys like me and you, not people who get paid for it. I'm talking about the people in the seats going, my job is to be a missionary. As Spurgeon said, I'm a missionary or I'm an imposter. So what does it mean to be the church in this moment? Our job, Ephesians 4 said, was always to equip the saints for the work of ministry. It's your job, viewer, not Dustin and I's job, to be the church in the world. I always say this to my church. You read Matthew 18 and you see this system of church discipline. If a guy's caught in sin, you go over, you approach him. He denies you. You bring 2 guys over, you go knock it off. He denies you. You tell it to the church.
Yeah.
It never says, tell it to the elders. Tell it to the bishops. They're busy. Go be the church. Yeah. You go over. It's your job. Here's the keys to the kingdom. Stop handing them back to me. Wow. It's your job. So it's kind of like this is a moment where the church is getting that message over and over and over again and going, okay, how do I actually come alive and be the church? How do I love and serve and wash feet and, actually do evangelism? There's a bunch of images running through my head, but there's a book by Rosemary Butterfield called Evangelism Comes to the House Key, and it's all about hospitality as the key to evangelism, opening up your life, your house, your money, your family, for the sake of doing the work of ministry. And all of that to say, there's some good that's coming out of that. For the skeptic, there's like a pressure. There's existential, massive questions about purpose. Yep. Who am I? Where am I? What's the problem? What's the solution? The big worldview questions that are being pressured, and the best answers are, we would say, in the person and the work of Jesus. So I think there's some good that's coming about it. It's causing the church to question itself, come alive in ways where we can't just show up to a church service, check a box and go, okay, that's my Christianity. It's like, what does discipling my kids mean now without the youth pastor?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, what does that mean? Like, of course, we're going to do the youth pastor on the Zoom and whatever, but I'm talking like in real life. What does ministering? So I think the church is called not to spread fear at a time like this.
Yeah.
But look, you go back through history, you look at what Spurgeon was doing during the cholera outbreak in London. You look at the Spanish flu. You look at the Roman Empire and them kicking their people to the street, and the church is grabbing a hold of these people and loving them into the kingdom at the cost of their own life, because they really believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and thus they didn't fear to die themselves. And it's like, that's what the church has always been called to do, not stay alive, but bring the kingdom. Because here's the thing about what God says to us who believe in Jesus. The prosperity gospel is wrong in the sense that, like, you're not going to get healthy, wealthy, wise, and great life just because you believe in Jesus. The real gospel is, I'm not going to necessarily save you from dying, but here's my message to you. You're safe in dying.
Yeah.
You can drown. You will drown, Dustin. At some point, you're going to die, man.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's because God's answer to your prayer to heal your disease or whatever is going to be no at some point.
Yeah.
But you're safe in dying.
Yeah.
And the beauty of the gospel is it gives the church something to stand on to eliminate fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then we hold that kind of piece out to the world, and we go in the midst of the fear and the chaos and the paranoia.
Yeah.
Which to be honest, a whole other conversation, I'm seeing Christians fall for.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, quiet. Talk about Jesus. Because as Paul says, and one of the fears that I have with all the other stuff that we build onto this is, Paul in Galatians talks about, like, you add anything onto the gospel, you've distracted people from the gospel.
Yeah.
So you go gospel plus whatever view on whatever, you're adding to the gospel in a way that makes people go, what are you trying to get people to believe? Your view on X or the gospel? What's your priority in life?
Yeah.
You know? So anyway, all to say, I think the church has a moment to reach out and show the world a kind of contentment, as Paul talks about in Philippians 4, and a joy in Christ in the midst of this stuff that the world will go, weird, like, why are they so content and joyous and you know, focused during a time like this rather than
exactly.
You know, so anyway.
Yeah, you know, we've mentioned to our people in different ways that, you know, at one point here a few weeks ago, I remember talking to somebody about, you know, if we invested half the time, some of us, that energy, passion that we put into complaining about politics right now, or, you know what I mean, into just the gospel, like, imagine the fruit that would come out of that, you know, like the things that are, it's enormous. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I have one last question. I promise I'll let you go. Last question. You are a church planter 10 years later. I had a ragtag team of 40 people, kids, people over 70, young adults. I'm 40, that set out to plant a church in a growing neighborhood on the west side of Kingston. COVID's happened. We grew in the first year. People came to Christ. Great things have happened. We are plowing through COVID right now. Could you? I don't know what I'm digging here for, but could you give me a little punch in the gut? Give me a little punch at our guys in the gut and say, plow through. I don't know. Any thoughts for us? Yeah.
It's look, I am seeing in my connections and conversations with people in ministry, I'm seeing a lot of men and women kind of bow out of ministry, going through a bit of an existential crisis and going, I got into this to be with people, and I got into this to be in community, and I got into this as a shepherd. And now most of those things are gone, and I'm having a crisis, and I want to just go be a plumber. And I'm seeing that, and being a plumber is awesome. That's ministry. But it's like people in ministry who've been trained in formal ministry are questioning everything, and they're leaving and I don't think it's going to get better. I think, you know, in the next little bit, when we go back to normal and we show back up at our churches and half the people are there, like, what happened to all of them? You know, I think it's going to get worse, but it's like, here's the thing. You have a calling that Jesus gave you. And sometime, I will remember this, and I just thought about this right now, Dustin. So when I went through church planting assessment, my wife and I and 8 other couples, through 3 days of like rigorous, crazy stuff. And it wasn't a question of ministry. It was a question of, are you called to be a church planter? And that was a very clear part of the report at the end. When they
I remember.
Right. You probably went through the same thing.
Yeah.
You gather everyone in a room, and it's like, look, we're not evaluating whether you should be in ministry. We're not evaluating whether you should be a pastor.
Yeah.
We're evaluating whether you should be a church planter. And they gave us the whole thing, and yellow light, green light, red light, blah, blah, blah. And then we all went for dinner after, and this church planter was there, and he was going through a difficult time, and he was 10 years in. And he just looked and he said, you know, I'm in the garbage right now. Like I got emails coming out. Everyone hates me. I'm just having division. I'm having all this stuff. And he goes, here's the thing, man. In moments like that, sometimes all that you have is the call. That's it. You've got, Jesus called me to do this 10 years ago. And that's the only reason I'm still doing it. And so, that's the thing, is there is such a moment here. We've got to be innovative. Rodney Stark said this. He said, secularization does not mean the end of religion in a culture. It means the stimulation of innovation.
Wow, that's good.
And that is the piece that guys like us have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, so we can't gather in person. What's the mission field now? This has to stimulate innovation, not kill the mission of the church.
Yeah.
And so we got to be innovative. It's not going to look like it did. All right, fair enough. What does it look like then? Because the mission doesn't end. Jesus isn't like, I'm going to build my, church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And then Peter's like, well, actually COVID. He's like, oh crap. Okay, never mind. The gates of hell will prevail.
Exactly.
It's like, dude, it's a flu. Let's get on with it. It's like, let's get on with the mission of the church.
That's going to be the picture we're going to put up to start. That'll be the soundbite after. It's the flu. Get on. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's not serious. Of course, we all know that. That's not my point.
Yeah.
My point is,
no,
Jesus is still on the throne, and he's directing the church to go in the midst of that. And there's actually been worse times. I know we forget this because we don't think historically. We think we think the last 12 months was the most important thing that ever happened in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Go back to the Spanish flu when 35 million people are dying and ask them if they thought it was the end of the world and what the church should do. Yeah. And as I said to my church week 1, and I wasn't trying to be coy, I said, my grandfather and a lot of grandfathers in here were called to go to war and fight the Nazis. You're called to sit on your couch. So everyone just chill.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that is a great final word for us. And thank you so much. I'm talking to Mark Clark tonight. He's the pastor of Village Church, Greater Vancouver area, stabbing eastward. They're moving our direction all the time. Great to have you. Thank you so much for sharing. Believe Conference Saturday night, Sunday night. We have somebody else sharing. To keep connected online on our website, Steve Lennox will be sharing. And stay connected. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
God bless you. Have a great evening.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.